At the end of the day, entrepreneurship is almost like you're hiring David to beat Goliath.
Today, we're diving into the world of entrepreneurship and how it's driving innovation in education. We'll be exploring how business strategies and creative thinking can help make learning more accessible for everyone.
And we'll take a look at the skills and dispositions that make great entrepreneurs and how they can be applied to education to create lasting change.
I think it's going to be a good one. Welcome to Schools In, your go-to podcast for cutting-edge insights in learning. Each episode, we dive into the latest trends, innovations, and challenges facing learners. I'm Denise Pope, Senior Lecturer at Stanford Graduate School of Education and co-founder of Challenge Success. And I'm with my co-host, Dan Schwartz, Dean of the Stanford GSE and the Faculty Director of the Stanford Accelerator for Learning.
Well, Dr. Denise, should we invest in that, Pope?
Should we? Yeah.
That was a terrible middle name. Nobody's going to have a middle name like that. So
I don't think anyone will have a middle name like that, but I know what you're trying to say because we are talking about entrepreneurship and investing in ideas today. And I just had a little inkling that I should look up the definition of the word entrepreneurship and where it came from. And I have to admit, I don't speak French, but it comes from the French word entreprendre. I don't know. Like someone's going to correct my French on that. What do you think? What do you think that means? And don't cheat. Did you already cheat? Did you already look it up? Are you looking it up right now? You are.
No.
Let
me just think. It is the
you're
activity
totally
of setting up a business or businesses taking on financial risks in the hope of profit. Did I get that right?
Okay, that's the definition of entrepreneurship. But what do you think the French entreprendre, whatever, means?
Take
a guess and don't cheat.
Yeah. So my 2 years of high school French, my 1 year of college French, preneur. To make lots of money by getting in between people.
Oh, it's interesting. So according to this article, I could be wrong. It says undertaker or adventurer. And what I thought was so interesting about that is they probably don't mean undertaker in the way that like we use undertaker, but you could understand that if a business totally goes flop, you might be an undertaker in the sort of traditional American way. But I like the concept of an adventurer and you're undertaking something, right?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Kind of interesting.
Yeah. No, so that was very educational, Denise.
Well, thank you. I try. But here's the thing. Today we're talking about someone who's not only an entrepreneur, but someone who chooses talent, basically. And Dan, you are in this business. You choose talent because you employ a whole bunch of people here at the School of Education. So tell me, what do you look for? What do you look for? How do you see talent?
Oh, yeah. I think there's two different types of managers or bosses. And there's those who can pick talent and those who can manage talent.
And they're not the same?
No, because I can pick talent.
But you can't.
No, that's just everybody.
Man, you're the dean. You're the dean.
Yes.
Of course you manage talent.
I have no idea what anybody's doing. It is so when I was just a beginning faculty member, I got put on a search committee, and their personal statements would show up and their resumes, and we'd have to look at all of them and choose who we want to interview. And there was this guy who's on the committee who'd been doing it for 20 years, and based on the paper trail, he could describe exactly what this person was going to be like when they showed up, and he was right. He was always right.
Wow.
And it was an amazing thing. But just think of how many different. I've evaluated whether to admit students. As a teacher, I've given grades. As a dean, I've evaluated faculty and staff. You get better at it.
Is there a secret sauce?
Maybe. When I listen to people talk, I'm listening to two things simultaneously. There's two channels going. One is what are they saying, and the other one is sort of what is the underlying intent for them to say that.
Ooh.
And I think that helps me get past surface features. So I don't get fooled very much.
Wow. I think that's a little bit of your philosophy major coming in or something, right? Go deeper.
But yeah, it is an amazing thing, and if I'm deciding to invest in something, I think there's more than just the people, but maybe not. Maybe you're really making a decision about the people.
Do you that's an interesting thing. Do you invest in things? Like, how do you make that decision then?
Do I invest?
Yeah.
I paid for my kids' college.
Yeah, that's an investment,
Does that
right?
count? Does that count?
Return on investment. How is that ROI right now?
I had to help him with his house, but otherwise, I think it's going to pay off well when I become 90.
Okay,
that'll be
there
the
you
ROI.
go. Good job, Dan. Good job.
Okay, we're trailing off, and we've lost the target here.
No,
So,
we're on.
Okay.
Go for it.
Okay. No, so it's my pleasure to introduce Sergio Monsalve. So Sergio co-founded the Entrepreneur in Residence program at the GSE. Again, the idea was there's a lot of students and maybe some faculty who would like to bring their products to scale, and industry is a way to do this. So we brought him in, his expertise in 2018, and the program has been going since. It's really good. Sergio teaches a beloved course on this. He has a degree from Stanford. He has an MBA from the Stanford of the East, Harvard. He started his career working at a venture capital and eBay and PayPal, but then he moved to education, and we'll want to find out why he made the switch. And he has his own shop called Rauble Ventures, and the quote is, "They invest in human enablement with a focus on lifelong learning and human adaptability." So, Sergio, thank you for joining us.
Yeah, welcome.
Thank you, Dan and Denise. Nice to see you guys.
Yeah.
Good to have you here.
So tell us about, before we find out the secret sauce to picking winners, why did you end up in education?
Well, it was accidental. As you mentioned, I was, I did an engineering degree at Stanford, loved my time there. In fact, Roble, funny fact, is the name of my freshman dorm at Stanford, Roble Hall.
And by the way, I was an RA in Roble Hall. We have a little
great.
bond. Thank you.
Awesome. I was my freshman dorm there. So loved it. It was my intro to Silicon Valley. And I just, loved my time learning. But one thing I realized when I was an investor is that I started, in 2013 or 2010, I started investing in education by accident. So the companies that we looked at that we liked, entrepreneurs that we liked, which we'll talk about. But it was very much about really thinking about the sort of the lifespan of a student and how it typically formally ends at 21, or in the case of a PhD, maybe a little later than that. But for the most part, 18 to 21, you start at 5 years old and you end at 21 years old. And so I asked myself, why is there no formal education be at 21 years old to 100 years old? And so that's my entry into a company that we ended up taking public. I was on the board for 7 years, called Udemy, which really focuses on making education very accessible to people by pricing it very low, and then allowing teachers to put up their courses online, sell them worldwide. And some of the instructors are making over $1 million a year on the platform, just going beyond the four walls of the classroom. So to me, it was empowering, both from the supply side, the teacher side, but empowering for us educating the world on skills that were very necessary in a world that is moving faster and faster and faster, which may actually require you to have multiple careers in your life, unlike our parents and grandparents that actually got to do one career and perhaps even not even move jobs over their lifetime. So this dynamism of the future of work means that you also need to download new concepts into your brain beyond 21 years old or 18 onto 100, ideally, right?
I like how you're just stopping at 100 there. It's like, and after that, that's it. You're done. No more.
Well, that's a round number.
Yeah, I'm kidding, Sergio. I do like the idea of selling my courses and getting $1 million, though. So that we'll talk about that after. We'll talk about that after. Go ahead, Dan.
But how did you switch to making that full time?
To education, yeah.
Yeah, was it a moral prerogative, or You
Yeah.
just found it an interesting space that you developed some expertise in, or?
Yeah, so I didn't finish that part of the story, but the real impetus is that as I was looking, we invested in Udemy, and then we looked at others, because as you know, success begets success, and entrepreneurs come to you in that specific field that they think you know much about. I realized that number one, I didn't know much about it, because I came from engineering and business, and I was missing a big part of it, which was learning science, pedagogy, and really the meat of how we put things on our brains. And that happened to all of us, in the sort of private world of edtech. There are engineers and business people that would say, "Hey, I was good at school. I must know learning, so I'm going to start a company with my engineering skills and business skills too." And so they were missing the education piece. So when I got into education, it was because I got to talking to Paul Kim, CTO at GSE, and he had been, he obviously has a pulse on edtech, but also has a pulse on Stanford, and said, "Hey, it'd be really interesting to think about this entrepreneur in residence program." And from that, I started talking to a lot of you at the GSE, and said, "Hey, this would be amazing to bring together with the engineers and the business people and the education people, because then we would actually minimize failure rates in edtech if we actually had these three types of people talking to each other." So when I started the course, so then I said, well, beyond the 1 year entrepreneur in residence program, what can I do to kind of create more of a ongoing sort of effort? And that's how the class came together. I'd never taught before. I'd never been a teacher. I get in talks, but that's much different, as I was very well told by the practitioners at the GSC that I needed learning lessons, pedagogy, and really grading and things like that. So I spent a lot of time really teaching myself how to be a teacher, a proper teacher. But then when I launched the class in 2000, maybe 17, I mean, this is my 6th year. It really struck a chord, because the way we start the class is to really tone down the sort of the preconceptions of what a business person is, what an engineer is what an educator is. And really my class was actually built on when I started at Roble, where I realized that doing inner tube water polo against the business guys was very intimidating. So I realized the GSB people are intimidating to my little undergrad self when I was a freshman. So I said, how can we reduce the intimidation factor and sort of reduce the preconceptions, and so bring a third engineers, a third business people, a third educators into one room and have them collaborate.
So Sergio, that's a great idea. So what are my preconceptions of business, engineer, and education? I know nothing. What are business?
It's all personal, I think. But the number one thing is that you shouldn't, and at least in my class, they shouldn't prejudge how people are approaching a specific problem to solve, or a specific startup. And so they kind of need to come at it from a very vulnerable, like, I don't know a lot of things perspective, rather than I know everything.
So there was a guy at Stanford who would run a fellowship, and he would get a medical resident, engineering, graduate student, and a business student. And their job was to develop a product to start up. And he said the hardest, I asked him how much work was that, and he said the work's the first 5 months, so that these three very different sort of sensibilities and skill sets learn to talk to each other. And that's where he has to play a really active role.
Absolutely.
To get them, so that it's interesting that there are different assumptions and strategies and attitudes.
Yeah, and we see it all the time. That's the hardest thing, to kind of bring people together that come from different points of view, right? And it takes a longer time, but it creates a better culture long term, right?
So when you're teaching these folks, you're teaching them about entrepreneurship. Are you also teaching them? I mean, you have so much experience now picking winners, right? That goes back to when I was talking to Dan about choosing talent. Like, what's a good pitch? What do you even look for?
Yeah. So the entrepreneurs, I mean, first of all, God, entrepreneurs are just very small portion of the population, and they're very rare, especially the good ones. They have to
Geez,
have a certain
it
thing.
seems like 50% of the people at Stanford are entrepreneurs. I'm just like,
Yeah.
I'm surrounded by them. If it's not AI all the time, it's entrepreneurship all the time.
Yeah. Well, a lot of them definitely want to be that,
Yeah.
and some of them do make, a lot of them.
Yeah.
Stanford's unique, right? I think they have to have a few things. One is a reason to do it. So back to Dan's mention of why are you doing this? The sort of the intent has to be real, has to be authentic. They can't just want to do it because they want to get rich quick. It has to be sort of almost a chip on their shoulder. So I look for that. Usually, and it's actually very proven and documented that a lot of them have had a history in their lives. Over 50% of them, for example, came to this country from a different country, right? So naturally, you're not a insider to the country. So a lot of them are underdogs. A lot of them have a chip on their shoulder. They have incredible curiosity, hence why Stanford, I think, has a much higher hit ratio than others. They have to be experimental, be okay to fail. And so we test that not just by looking at their resume and interviewing them, but by really doing a very strong back channel referencing, front channel referencing, really spending time with them, really trying to get to something beyond the resume. Because at the end of the day, entrepreneurship is almost like you're hiring David to beat Goliath. And how does David beat Goliath? It has to be a real person, knows how to maneuver, be adaptable, reshape the landscape, make sure they don't go with the in the box way of fighting Goliath, which is via strength. So you have to kind of reshape the landscape, and so that requires a lot.
Okay, that sounds like almost impossible to me. I was like, well, that counts me out. Okay, right.
So I was talking to Jorge Paulo Lemon, one of the wealthiest people in Latin America, and I was asking him about people who are really like super successful, and he said they're all insane.
They're insane?
They're all insane because, maniacal, driven.
Are you calling Sergio maniacal and insane?
No, I'm raising the possibility. No.
I am. But it was sort of,
yeah, it was sort of echoing the point that you need someone who's quite driven and, bounces back from setbacks and
being adaptable, resilient. I mean, why would you go into a ring with a giant and try to fight that giant? That's stupid. Insane is probably another way to put it, right? So I 100% agree, Dan. I don't know why people do it, but it is addictive to do it. Yeah. And I love it.
That's where we're going to end for 1 second. We're going to pause for just a minute and be back with the second half of the show where we're going to talk more with Sergio about this insanity and maybe some really nice advice for folks out there who are looking to invest and choose talent wisely. So we'll be right back after this break. Welcome back. This is Schools In with Denise Pope and Dan Schwartz, and our guest is Sergio Monsalve, who is really co-founded the Entrepreneurship in Residence program here at the School of Education. And Sergio, I have a question for you because you at the beginning of the show you were talking about sort of qualities that you were looking for. Insanity was one of them, right? But there was a whole list of qualities, and a part of me is thinking, but wait, you're also offering classes on this. So can you teach someone to be an entrepreneur? Is it a learned skill?
Yes. The answer is yes. There's some proclivities that people have when they're sort of young and how they grow up, but I think it's very much behavioral. Hence why I do think that who your parents are and how you grew up and all that does affect it, and we've seen that it does affect it. It runs in the family, it runs in the society. Stanford's very infectious, and so that society itself breeds more infection around entrepreneurship. So I do think that there's exercises, if it's a training, there's exercises you can do along all this sort of the handful of dimensions that we look for as an entrepreneur to actually sort of exercise those muscles and really get better at it. Because there's very uncomfortable things that you need to do as an entrepreneur that are not natural for any person, but it's more natural for some than others, right?
You have to give an example.
Yeah,
give
an example.
You have to give an example.
What is this not natural thing?
I want to know if I'm unnatural. You have to give an example.
So that's what I was going to get to. I'm glad that you're teased by that. I think, for example, feeling uncomfortable is very unnatural. And so what I try to do for myself and others is, have you done something that feels incredibly uncomfortable in the last week? And what is that? Meaning that for me, sometimes it's socially uncomfortable. I'm trying other things that are physically uncomfortable, but just get yourself outside of your comfort zone. One great example of that, Dan, is I teaching the class at Stanford in front of 50 super sharp students for the first time ever, having never taught, was incredibly uncomfortable. But I had to kind of rise up to that. And it was the most incredibly exciting experiences I've had. But it was quite a bit of preparation to get there, right? And so I just don't think enough people, as they get older, do enough things that are kind of experimental and sort of, hey, I'm going to try this, but I might fail, and it feels totally uncomfortable, but I'm going to do it, right? So Denise, that's one example.
Yeah. So Denise, does this mean that in my courses I should make everybody feel uncomfortable?
No.
Hey, everybody! It's Wednesday morning. It's uncomfort day.
Yeah, there's going to be a pop quiz or whatever. No, I think what Sergio is saying is that in his class, it's a safe place to practice this and think about getting out of your comfort area, because you're going to have to do it so much as an entrepreneur.
Yeah.
Right.
But exactly. you have to set up the situation where I have to get out of it. Or no, you tell me it's okay. Or you actually put me in a situation.
He just asked you to reflect. No, you can even just say, can you reflect on a time this week that you did something uncomfortable?
It has to be intrinsic. It has to be intrinsic, because if, Dan, you're telling your students to be uncomfortable, that defeats the purpose.
No, I wouldn't tell them. I would make them.
He would just. But he does that normally, Sergio. No.
That's normal.
No. But wait, okay. So if I understand that, like, you have to teach them to be comfortable with discomfort, but there's also some basics. Like, I don't know anything about marketing. I don't know anything. I mean, there's some business things that as an educator, maybe I don't know. There's, like you said, there was some pedagogical stuff that you had to learn coming from business. So how do you do this?
The other thing that I think that the one thing is that you have to realize that to be an entrepreneur, you almost have to be a decathlete, and you have to do 10 sports, but none of them you do really, really the best. You're never the best, but you need to know enough. So what I look for is this incredible curiosity where a lot of the entrepreneurs have a knowledge or curiosity about a lot of things. So that's your sort of very wide, but not very deep. And then they have a very deep function that they've gone really deep in. So they may be natural engineers or marketers, and that's been their career, but they have incredible curiosity about other things: legal, marketing, sales, all the things that require you to kind of grow a firm. And so what happens then is, because you know enough to be dangerous, and you also need to be incredibly introspective about yourself and really know yourself, which is actually a really, really hard skill. But if you actually know yourself and you know enough to be dangerous on all these different areas, then you'll know what to hire for or how to pair up with the right person as a co-founder, so that you at least have the basics at the beginning. The basics at the beginning are very simple. You either build the product or you sell the product. That's all there is to it at the beginning. But later on, you actually have to count the beans and count the money that's coming in. And so you need finance, you need all these other things, HR. But at the beginning is all about building that product, making sure your customers love it, and then sell it to the customers. And so those skills are at the beginning the most important things. But if you're introspective and you know enough in other areas, then you're going to be pretty successful. So you don't have to be an expert at everything. You'll be a decathlete, right?
I want to ask a different line of questioning that is it's an honest concern. So I am bringing corporate sensibilities into the academy, right? But the academy is on a very slow timeline. It is deep expertise in one thing. And so, meanwhile, in the corporate world, it's go fast. You got to beat other people to market. Are these two cultures? Can we get them to work together, or is it ultimately we're going to get students who aren't interested in the depth of scholarship because they want to be entrepreneurs, and so they're going to have trouble in classes, or the faculty will become entrepreneurs and stop doing the depth? Am I making a mistake bringing these two cultures together?
I think they cohabit, but there's different. Some are very fast twitch muscles. The other ones are more long distance, sort of. Again, the athletic analogy here, but but Dan, I think they could cohabit. I always think of it as like, why are entrepreneurs so fast moving? It's a lot of the decisions, especially in software. I think of it in terms of two-door decisions versus one-door decision. If it's a two-door decision, means that you can make the decision and come back to it. And so in software, a lot of times you can do an MVP, take it back and relaunch it. In academia,
MVP does not stand for most valuable player here. It is minimally viable product. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay,
that's
look,
right.
so aren't you excited that I know that? I just learned that like 2 months ago.
That's
Minimally
awesome.
viable product. Okay, MVP. Thank you,
You
Sergio.
can
Sorry
you
to
can
interrupt.
launch your prototype, your
Totally.
MVP, and you could take it back. But in academia, you can't just put out something that's inaccurate and then take it back. So it's more of you're dealing with more of a one door decision sometimes. So that's, again, I'm giving you the academic versus entrepreneur, but this in life, there's always decisions that are irreversible versus reversible. And so I think it's important to go beyond academics and entrepreneurship when they're oiling water. It's more like, what are the things that we need to think about that are irreversible versus reversible, and then those mentalities, then maybe there's a sort of translation mechanism so that both worlds can live together. But it's all about what kind of decisions are you making, I guess.
That's really interesting.
There's another tension that we tend to see too, which is money. This is going to be best for kids, and this is going to make us a lot of money. And sometimes there is a choice where you have to say, wait a minute, that's not necessarily best for kids, right?
Yeah.
So bottom line of an educator might be different from a bottom line of a company. What do you make of that, sir?
I know that's one of the biggest dilemmas we talk in class, because I always think of it. I show my students this really nice framework where if you're teaching something where you're going to get ROI very quickly, that those business metrics do work. Because let's say in the case of adult education, where you're just learning one skill and that'll help you accomplish your assignment next day, then that worked. You learned the skill, you created your project, and your boss was happy, and you kind of, the full cycle happened. What I'm really struggling with, and this is why I brought the class together with educators, is how do you, in a delayed gratification situation where you're teaching kindergartners something that may not have ROI for a long time, how do you put product efficacy and pedagogical value up front rather than economic value, versus the lifelong learning approach, which is very close. So I've been struggling with that's why we have a third in our class, there, educators, to kind of really think about, okay, how can you infuse that early on in the product? Because long term, it'll be a better product if it has the efficacy, but it takes a while to know that, right? So we need a better data to come up front, so that we could operate in a much more faster cycle environment and much more accurate, right?
Interesting. And sometimes you don't have that data. Sometimes you really won't have that upfront data. So it makes it even harder.
Yeah, exactly. But this is where I think a lot of the work that happens in the GSC is very valuable, because there is science on what makes people learn better. And so if you bring it and you build it, codify it into something that's scalable technologically, then it's going to be better for everybody. That's why I think it's not it has to be all, I call it 3 disciplines: business, engineering, and in education. But obviously we have a humanities. We just signed up a medical student. And so I think all 7 schools at Stanford get involved into this problem. And that's why I think we have 6 out of 7 schools usually represented. The lawyers usually don't come, but that's a whole different.
Wait, but you definitely need the lawyers too, right?
We do, but I think they have a whole different registration. So I'm going with that.
So I have an opposite problem. So faculty have made a very good educational product. Oftentimes it's kind of a test, right? Universities are very good at making measurement. And they refuse to monetize it because they believe it should be a public good. And I appreciate this. At the same time, their code base will become obsolete, right? And they're going to have to keep rewriting the code, things like that. But they don't want to monetize, and so they don't have a plan for how to bring this to scale. They expect people to just come to it, or how to provide customer support, right? They just hope people take it and use it. And so how can I convince them?
Well, the value exchange. So first of all, there are things that I don't invest in. I don't want to invest in a tutoring service that charges $10,000 per student, because that's very gap widening. There's things that are very gap closing. And so when you actually make the value exchange very fair and accessible to a lot of people, so like the example of Udemy, where the courses are $40, or in Kahoot, the courses, the little games that I play in my class, the Kahoot games, are very accessible to any teacher to buy, or even free. And so to me, that's a very, very fair value exchange. I think you should say that you could raise money 2 ways: philanthropy, or by exchanging value with your customers in a fair way and equitable way. I like that better, because then you could hire employees, you could actually do marketing, you could do a lot of things when it's an ongoing concern, rather than you having to spend all your time pitching nonprofits to give you money on an ad hoc basis, because that's not very sustainable. And that also doesn't attract the best employees, because they don't feel like the company's an ongoing concern, right? An ongoing entity. So I always say, what is the fair exchange that is equitable and accessible to a lot of people, right?
I think just even in this one little session today, I have learned a lot. And you've given us a lot to think about, Sergio. And we so appreciate all of your metaphors: the decathlon, the 1 door versus 2 doors, and the David and Goliath. I mean, really, you've really helped us to visualize it.
Agreed. It's great stuff to be thinking about, especially when it comes to finding that balance between keeping education accessible and building sustainable models.
Right. And I thought another really important idea was the idea of a fair value exchange, right? Making sure educational tools are not just affordable, but also that they can grow and that they can be sustainable. I think that's important for educators and entrepreneurs to keep in mind.
So a key, I thought, was the combination of education, business, and engineering working together to ensure that we're tackling education solutions from all angles.
Yes, I love that. I love that combo, right? How powerful. Sergio, thank you so much again for joining us today. And thank you all for tuning in to this episode of Schools In. Be sure to subscribe to the show on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you tune in. I'm Denise Pope.
And I'm Dan Schwartz.